From Studio 19, I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. Let's not waste any time, so here we go. The House passed the Ukraine Support Act by a vote of 226 to 195. The bill authorizes roughly $8 billion in military financing loans for Ukraine, extends the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative through 2027, and adds sanctions aimed at Russia. Those are the details. Now let's get to the part that should make everybody in Washington sit up a little straighter. Republicans crossed Donald Trump. They didn't whisper it in the hallway. They didn't leak it through some anonymous site. They voted with Democrats on Ukraine and Russia, two subjects where Trump has turned the Republican Party into a foreign policy yoga class, where everyone keeps bending themselves into impossible positions just to stay aligned with Trump. These are the same Republicans who spent years acting like crossing Trump would make their careers burst into flames on live television. These are the same people who used to talk about Russia like it was the great threat to democracy. Then Trump came along, and suddenly they started treating Vladimir Putin like a misunderstood exchange student who just needed better press coverage. The party that once sold itself as tough on dictators somehow became the party where half the room looked at Russia invading Ukraine and said, "Well, hold on. Have we considered how this affects Donald Trump's feelings?" That's what makes his vote so revealing. Republicans don't suddenly grow a spine because the lighting in the Capitol improved. Courage didn't wander into the building looking for a bathroom and accidentally end up on the House floor. Now, these people move because politicians move when they smell a change in power. That's what they do. They don't need a weather app. They are the weather app. They could detect a shift in political pressure faster than a dog hears a cheese wrapper open in another room. So when Republicans cross Trump on Ukraine, the real question isn't whether they suddenly became noble defenders of democracy. Please, let's keep at least 1 foot in reality. The real question is what changed. Because you don't spend years treating one man like the owner of your political oxygen tank and then suddenly take a public vote against him, unless you think the oxygen tank may not control the whole room anymore. Maybe they're looking at Trump's age. He's approaching 80. Maybe they're looking at his public appearances. Maybe they're looking at the rambling, the confusion, the way some speeches now feel less like political rallies from Trump and more like someone shook a box of refrigerator magnets and read whatever landed face up. I'm not diagnosing Trump. I'm saying politicians are watching. They always watch. They watch strength. They watch weakness. They watch crowds. They watch donors. They watch polls. They watch whether the fear still works. And maybe that's the dangerous part for Trump. Fear has been the operating system of the modern Republican Party. Cross Trump, get primaried. Cross Trump, get attacked. Cross Trump and get turned into a villain by the same people who were praising you last week. That fear kept Republicans in line for years. It made grown adults pretend not to hear insane things. It made senators suddenly develop the posture of a houseplant whenever Trump did something they knew was indefensible. But fear only works as long as everyone believes the punishment is coming. If Republicans start crossing Trump and nothing happens, the spell begins to break. If one group crosses him on Ukraine and survives, another group may cross him on something else. Then another, then another. Not because they found their souls. Let's not get ridiculous. This is Congress. Most of them would need a subpoena to locate their souls. They'll do it because the risk calculation changed. That's why this Ukraine vote matters beyond Ukraine. It may be the sound of Republicans quietly asking the question they're too afraid to say out loud. What if Trump isn't the future anymore? What if the power is fading? What if the man they built their careers around, defended, excused, worshipped, feared, and obeyed is starting to look less like a permanent force and more like a political expiration date approaching in real time? If that's what the Republicans are seeing, expect more of this. Not a dramatic rebellion, not some heroic scene where Republicans march out and announce they've rediscovered democracy. No, it'll be uglier and more pathetic than that. It'll be slow. It'll be cautious. It'll be one vote here, one comment there, one lawmaker suddenly remembering Russia is bad, one senator suddenly discovering concern, one House member suddenly realizing they had a backbone all along and apparently was just lost somewhere behind the donor list. The Ukraine Support Act may pass into history as a foreign policy bill, but politically it may be something else. It may be one of the first moments where Republicans looked at Trump, looked at Russia, looked at Ukraine, looked at their own survival, and decided maybe they didn't have to keep pretending Donald Trump's every instinct was sacred scripture. And if more Republicans decide they can survive crossing him, that doesn't just weaken Trump on one vote. It weakens the whole illusion that he still controls every room he walks into. Now, on the other side of Washington, while House Republicans were showing signs that they might occasionally be capable of independent thought, Senate Republicans spent the night reminding everyone that there are still plenty of elected officials who treat Donald Trump's wish list like it's written on stone tablets. After an 18-hour marathon vote, Senate Republicans advanced roughly $70 billion in funding for immigration enforcement agencies. The money had been carved out of an earlier agreement that reopened the rest of the Department of Homeland Security, and the funding would extend through the remainder of Trump's time in the White House. Only one Republican, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, voted against it. The measure now heads to the House, where it could receive a vote as early as next week. What jumps out is in immigration. It's the contrast. A few minutes ago, we were talking about House Republicans crossing Trump on Ukraine. Now we're looking at Senate Republicans lining up behind one of Trump's biggest priorities with almost no resistance. It's like watching one half of the Republican Party slowly test whether the electric fence is still on, while the other half is standing there polishing the fence and thanking it for its service. Washington throws around billion-dollar numbers so casually they become background noise. $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon Congress is spending more money like somebody handed them the company credit card after 3 margaritas and said, try not to do anything crazy. But $70 billion is still $70 billion. These are the same Republicans who've spent years warning us about government spending, government waste, government bureaucracy, government overreach, government power, and government agencies that supposedly wake up every morning looking for ways to ruin America. Mention a Democratic spending proposal, and suddenly everybody becomes a certified public accountant. They want audits, investigations, pie charts, flow charts, spreadsheets, and a forensic examination of the receipt paper. Trump wants $70 billion, and suddenly the watchdogs become golden retrievers. Sorry, Cooper, that's my golden. All that suspicion disappears. All that skepticism disappears. All that concern about federal power disappears. Apparently, government isn't dangerous anymore. Apparently, it just needed different management. Now, Democrats argued that any Homeland Security funding package should include additional restraints on federal immigration authorities, including stronger identification requirements and greater use of judicial warrants. Agree with those ideas or disagree with them, that's not really the issue. The issue is that Congress is supposed to ask questions. Congress isn't supposed to be a fan club. Congress isn't supposed to be a cheering section. Congress isn't supposed to hear a president ask for $70 billion and immediately respond like contestants trying to make it to the bonus round. Only one Republican voted no. One out of the entire Senate Republican caucus. One person, Murkowski, looked at $70 billion and apparently remembered that oversight is part of her job description. Meanwhile, House Republicans crossed Trump on Ukraine and survived the experience. The sky didn't fall. The Capitol didn't collapse. Mar-a-Lago didn't fire a space laser at anybody. Life continued exactly as before. Yet Senate Republicans looked at that example and apparently concluded that independent thought remains an unnecessary workplace risk. That's why I think this story is bigger than immigration. What we're watching is a Republican Party that seems to be splitting into two camps. One group is starting to test the limits of Trump's influence. The other group still behaves like disagreement requires written permission, 2 witnesses, and approval from party headquarters. That's not a policy divide. That's a political divide. And it's getting harder to ignore because eventually these two versions of the Republican Party are going to collide. One side appears to be wondering whether Trump's still the future. The other side is acting like the future already happened and his name is carved into the furniture. That's why this vote matters. Not because it's $70 billion. Not because it's immigration. Because every time the House and Senate react this differently to the same political figure, it tells us something about where the Republican Party is heading. And right now, it looks like one side's cautiously stepping outside Trump's shadow, while the other side's still measuring the shadow to make sure it's large enough. You know what drives me crazy about all of this? The chaos. Not the normal political chaos. Washington's always been chaotic. I'm talking about the kind of chaos where nobody seems to know what the hell they're doing from one day to the next. In one chamber of Congress, Republicans are finally showing the signs that they might be willing to, occasionally stand up to Trump. Not often. Let's not get carried away. But at least a few of them willing to test whether disagreement automatically results in political death. Then you look at the Senate like we just did, and it's like stepping into an entire different reality. House Republicans are asking questions. Senate Republicans are still treating Trump like he's the answer sheet to an exam they forgot to study for. One chamber is cautiously testing independence. The other chamber is still competing the Olympic event of synchronized obedience. And while all of this political theater keeps playing out, the American people are stuck paying the bills. People are struggling with housing costs, insurance, groceries, medical bills, retirement jobs, and whether they can afford next month, let alone next year. But Washington acts like the biggest issue in America is whether politicians remain loyal enough to one politician. That's the insanity. Not Ukraine, not immigration, not the latest political fight. It's that millions of Americans are trying to hold their lives together, while elected officials spend their time measuring loyalty, calculating political risk, protecting careers, and fighting internal party wars. At some point, somebody's supposed to remember who government actually works for. Because from where I sit, Wolfpack, Americans keep getting the chaos, the drama, the speeches, the press conferences, and the endless political games. Everyone else gets the show. The American people keep getting stuck with the check. If you've enjoyed the podcast, found it informative, maybe got a laugh or two, then please contribute to keeping this podcast around. I'm not backed by corporate media. There's no outside money funding this podcast other than my own wallet. So if you could contribute, please do so to the GoFundMe below. Even a small donation makes a difference. The GoFundMe link is in the description in the episode notes. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. I'll be back Monday. Until then, I urge you, the Wolfpack, remain skeptical. Question everything. Please, don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.